Picture this, a jungle so alive it hums with secrets, where every leaf hides a story and every creature carries a lesson. Today, we're diving into a tale that'll tug at your heartstrings and make you believe in the impossible. It's about a gorilla named Kofi, a lion with a wounded spirit, and a human who learned that compassion knows no boundaries. This isn't just a story, it's a reminder that sometimes, the wild teaches us what it means to be human. Ready to feel the heartbeat of the African savanna? Let's step into the jungle together. The African jungle woke with a restless buzz, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and wild orchids. John, a weathered park ranger with calloused hands and a soft heart, trekked through the undergrowth, his boots squelching in the mud. The dawn was breaking, painting the canopy in hues of gold, but something felt off, like the universe was whispering a warning. Then he heard it, a faint, desperate whimper, raw and piercing, cutting through the chorus of birds. John froze, his pulse quickening, the weight of the moment sinking in. Somewhere close, a life hung in the balance, calling him to act. He pushed through thorny vines, their sharp tips snagging his shirt, until he reached a clearing. There, tangled in a cruel poacher's trap, was a gorilla infant, no bigger than a toddler, its fur matted with sweat and fear. Its tiny chest heaved, eyes wide with panic, searching for a mother who'd never come. John's throat tightened, orphaned, starving. The little guy didn't have long. He knelt, his voice a soothing murmur, "Hang on, buddy." Could he free the infant before its strength faded completely? With steady hands, John cut the ropes, wincing as they fell away to reveal raw, bloodied skin. The gorilla, too weak to struggle, let out a soft grunt, almost like a thank you, its warmth fragile against John's chest. He named him Kofi, meaning born on Friday, a nod to the day hope found them both. As he carried Kofi back to camp, the jungle seemed to exhale, its leaves rustling softly. The weight of this tiny life stirred something deep in John, a protective instinct he hadn't known he had. What would it take to nurse this fragile soul back to strength? At the ranger station, John became Kofi's world. He mixed milk with honey, feeding the infant drop by drop, the sweet aroma filling the humid air. Kofi's eyes, once dull with despair, began to sparkle, tracking John's every move. Nights were long, filled with the distant roars of predators and the rustle of leaves outside, but John never wavered. He'd sit by Kofi's crate, humming old folk tunes, feeling a bond grow stronger than he'd ever known. The jungle's pulse seemed to sync with their quiet moments, as if blessing this new beginning. Was this little gorilla teaching him something about trust? By the third week, Kofi was toddling around, chasing fireflies under the starlit sky, his playful grunts echoing like laughter. John watched, a grin spreading across his face, marveling at the resilience of this tiny soul. The jungle had tested them, but they'd passed, together. Yet, as Kofi grew, John felt a stirring in his gut, a sense that their story was far from over. The wild had more in store, and Kofi's heart, already so big, was just beginning to show its strength. What role would this spirited gorilla play in the vast, untamed world around them? The jungle pulsed with life, its air heavy with the tang of ripe mangoes and the faint musk of distant elephants. Kofi, now a sturdy young gorilla with a glossy black coat, bounded through the ferns, his knuckles thumping the earth like a steady drumbeat. John trailed behind, his laughter mingling with the chatter of monkeys overhead. 5 years had passed since the rescue, and Kofi had grown into a force of nature, his playful nudges strong enough to knock John off balance. Their connection felt like a gift, as if the stars had aligned to weave their paths together. But how deep could this friendship really go? On patrols, Kofi was John's shadow, his amber eyes scanning the underbrush with an uncanny sharpness. The jungle was no stranger to danger, poachers, snares, predators, but Kofi's instincts were a shield. Once, when a cobra slithered too close, Kofi's low growl sent it retreating, his massive hand gently pushing John back. That night, under the flickering glow of a campfire, John scratched Kofi's back, the gorilla's contented sighs filling the silence. Who'd have thought a wild creature could teach such fierce loyalty? Yet, John sensed Kofi was more than a protector, something bigger was stirring in those soulful eyes. Their mornings began with a ritual. Kofi would climb a towering acacia, the dawn light catching his silhouette as he tossed twigs playfully at John below. The ranger would retaliate, chucking a mango, only for Kofi to catch it midair with a triumphant hoot. These moments, filled with the scent of dew-soaked grass and the warmth of shared laughter, wove a bond stronger than words. John often wondered if Kofi understood his stories, tales of his childhood, his dreams, because those eyes seemed to listen, reflecting a wisdom beyond species. Could an animal really know a human's heart like that? Kofi's presence changed the reserve, too. Other rangers, once skeptical of John's gorilla sidekick, now marveled as Kofi alerted them to hidden traps, his powerful frame parting vines like curtains. The team's respect grew, and John felt a quiet pride, like a parent watching their kid shine. At dusk, when the sky burned orange and crickets sang, John and Kofi would sit by the river, the water's gentle gurgle a backdrop to their stillness. The jungle seemed to bless their friendship, its breezes carrying a promise of more to come. But what challenge would test this unbreakable tie? One evening, as fireflies danced like tiny lanterns, John noticed Kofi's usual playfulness fade. The gorilla paced, his grunts sharp, almost urgent, as if he sensed a disturbance only he could hear. John's stomach tightened. Kofi had never acted this way before. The jungle held its breath, and John trusted his friend's instincts, feeling the weight of their bond guide them forward. Whatever was out there, Kofi was ready to lead the way, his heart a compass in the wild. Little did John know, their connection was about to face a test that would redefine compassion itself. The jungle thrummed with tension, the air sharp with the metallic tang of an approaching storm. Kofi's unease from the previous night had grown into a restless urgency, his massive frame weaving through the undergrowth with purpose. John followed, his heart pounding, the crunch of dry leaves underfoot sinking with Kofi's heavy breaths. The gorilla's eyes darted, catching glints of danger invisible to human senses. It was as if the earth itself had sent Kofi a message, a call only his instincts could answer. What was out there, pulling them deeper into the wild's embrace? They pushed past curtains of moss, the damp fibers brushing John's arms like ghostly fingers. Kofi stopped abruptly, his low grunt vibrating through the stillness, and pointed toward a thicket. There, half hidden by tangled roots, lay a lion, its golden fur streaked with dirt and blood. A poacher's trap clamped its hind leg, the steel jaws glinting cruelly in the filtered sunlight. The lion's ragged growls, raw with pain, sent a chill down John's spine, stirring a primal urge to help. How could Kofi, a gorilla, sense this predator's suffering across the divide of species? Kofi's reaction was astonishing. Instead of baring his teeth, natural for a gorilla facing a rival species, he crouched, his massive hands trembling as he let out a soft, mournful hoot. John watched, awestruck, as Kofi's eyes locked onto the lion's, radiating an empathy that transcended their differences. It was a moment that felt sacred, like the jungle had paused to witness this impossible connection. John's mind raced, a lion and a gorilla, enemies by instinct, yet here was Kofi, pleading for action. Could they save this king of the wild before it was too late? John radioed for backup, his voice tight with urgency, while Kofi paced protectively near the lion, his shadow a shield against the world. The lion, too weak to lash out, seemed to sense Kofi's intent, its amber eyes softening for a fleeting second. The air grew heavy, charged with the distant rumble of thunder, as if nature itself held its breath. John knelt beside the trap, his fingers brushing the cold metal, knowing every second counted. The jungle's pulse seemed to urge them on, a reminder of the stakes. Would Kofi's compassion inspire a miracle? As the team's jeep rumbled closer, Kofi stood guard, his deep grunts a steady rhythm against the lion's pained whimpers. John glanced at his friend, feeling a surge of gratitude for this gorilla who saw beyond species, beyond fear. The jungle, with its chorus of cicadas and swaying palms, seemed to hum in approval, its energy fueling their resolve. Whatever happened next, Kofi had already rewritten the rules of the wild with his heart. But could they free the lion before its strength gave out completely? The jungle hummed with urgency, the air thick with the sharp scent of antiseptic and the faint coppery tang of blood. John's team arrived, their jeep's engine fading into the drone of cicadas as they unloaded medical gear under a sky bruised with storm clouds. The lion lay panting, its massive chest rising and falling, the trap's cruel jaws still biting into its leg. John's hands trembled as he prepared a sedative dart, his eyes flicking to Kofi, who stood like a sentinel, his deep grunts a steady anchor. It was as if the gorilla sensed the weight of this moment, a test of compassion in the wild. Could they pull this off without losing the lion's fading light? The sedative took hold, and the lion's growls softened to a low rumble, its amber eyes glazing over. John and the veterinarian, Aisha, worked swiftly, their tools clinking softly against the trap's rusted metal. The jungle seemed to lean in, the rustle of leaves and distant monkey calls fading into a tense hush. Kofi edged closer, his massive frame casting a shadow over the scene, and let out a soft, almost human whimper. John's heart ached. Here was a gorilla, moved by a lion's pain, showing a solidarity that felt like a lesson from the universe. Would this fragile hope hold through the operation? Aisha's brow furrowed as she probed the wound, the lion's blood staining her gloves a deep crimson. The trap had cut deep, and every second risked infection or worse. John held the lion's paw, its rough pads warm against his palm, and whispered, "You're gonna make it, big guy." Kofi, as if understanding, rested a gentle hand on the lion's flank, his touch steady and warm, like a friend offering comfort. The team exchanged glances, awestruck by this interspecies connection, their hands steadier for it. Could Kofi's presence be the strength they all needed to see this through? The trap finally gave way with a grating snap, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the clearing. The lion twitched, its tail flicking faintly, and Aisha began stitching the wound, her needle glinting in the dim light. Kofi watched, his eyes wide with what John swore was concern, his breath sinking with the lion's shallow gasps. The air grew heavier, the storm's first raindrops pattering on the canopy above, as if nature wept for the lion's pain. John felt a lump in his throat. Had he ever seen such raw emotion in an animal? What would Kofi do when the lion stirred? As Aisha bandaged the wound, Kofi shuffled closer, his knuckles brushing the earth, and nuzzled the lion's mane with a tenderness that stole John's breath. The team worked in silence, the only sounds the lion's faint breathing and the soft drip of rain. This moment, fragile and profound, felt like a bridge between species, built on compassion and trust. John looked at Kofi, his heart swelling with pride for his friend's unshakable heart, knowing this act would echo through the jungle. But as the lion stirred, would it see Kofi as a savior, or a threat to its pride? The jungle exhaled as the storm passed, leaving a cool mist that clung to the leaves like a delicate veil. The lion, now resting in a shaded enclosure at the ranger station, stirred faintly, its bandaged legs sprawled across a bed of fresh straw. Kofi, ever watchful, lingered nearby, his fur glistening with dew as he sat under a tamarind tree, its tart scent sharp in the morning air. John leaned against a wooden post, sipping bitter coffee, his eyes fixed on Kofi's gentle gaze toward the lion. This wasn't just recovery, it was a quiet miracle, a testament to compassion that felt like a whisper from the wild. What would Kofi do next to prove his boundless heart? Each dawn, Kofi made his pilgrimage to the enclosure, his heavy steps softened by the damp earth, carrying offerings of wild figs and guavas, their sweet juices staining his fingers. He'd place them near the lion, grunting softly as if to say, "You're not alone." The lion, once a symbol of raw power, now accepted the gifts with a slow blink, its mane rustling like dry grass in the breeze. John watched, a warmth spreading in his chest. Had he ever seen such friendship between species? Kofi's actions spoke of a bond that defied instinct, a coexistence that felt almost holy. Could this tenderness last beyond the enclosure? The rangers began calling it Kofi's vigil, their voices tinged with awe as they gathered to watch. Kofi's presence seemed to soothe the lion, whose growls softened to contented rumbles, like distant thunder fading into peace. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the canopy, painting golden patches on the enclosure, Kofi reached through the bars, his massive hand brushing the lion's paw. The lion didn't flinch, instead, it leaned into the touch, a low purr vibrating through the air. John's throat tightened. Who'd have thought enemies could teach such solidarity? What did this mean for the jungle's fragile balance? Kofi's visits weren't just gestures, they were lessons in empathy, etched in the quiet moments when he'd sit by the enclosure, the chirp of sparrows filling the silences. The lion, growing stronger, began to rise, its movements stiff but determined, as if Kofi's care fueled its overcoming. John noticed how the other animals, monkeys, antelopes, seemed to watch from the treeline, their stillness a nod to this interspecies truce. It was as if the jungle itself was learning from Kofi's heart, its rhythms softening in reverence. But how would this bond hold when the lion was ready to roam free? As the lion's strength returned, Kofi's visits grew more playful. He'd roll a guava like a ball, nudging it toward the lion, who swatted it back with a clumsy paw, their game kicking up dust that glowed in the evening light. John laughed, his voice echoing through the camp, feeling like he'd witnessed a miracle of connection. This wasn't just a gorilla and a lion, it was a promise that compassion could bridge any divide, a lesson etched in the jungle's soul. Yet, as the day of the lion's release loomed, John wondered, would this friendship endure beyond the enclosure's bars, or would the wild reclaim its own? The jungle shimmered under a late afternoon sun, its golden rays slicing through the canopy to dance on the earth below, where wild grasses swayed with a faint, peppery scent. The day of the lion's release had arrived, and the ranger station buzzed with a bittersweet energy, the air alive with the chatter of rangers and the soft clink of metal gates being prepped. The lion, now strong, paced in its enclosure, its mane catching the light like a crown of fire, its heeled leg moving with a cautious grace. John stood by the gate, his chest tight with pride and a pang of loss, watching Kofi, who sat nearby, his dark fur dusted with pollen, eyes fixed on the lion. This moment felt like a sacred turning point, as if the universe had orchestrated this farewell to teach them all about overcoming. Would the lion remember the gorilla who'd saved its spirit? Kofi had spent the morning unusually quiet, his usual playfulness replaced by a stillness that seemed to carry the weight of goodbye. He'd brought one last guava, placing it gently by the enclosure, but instead of rolling it, he sat back, his massive hands resting on his knees, grunting softly as the lion sniffed the fruit. John crouched beside him, the earth cool beneath his palms, and murmured, "You did good, buddy." The lion's amber eyes met Kofi's, and for a fleeting moment, the jungle's hum, of crickets, of wind through acacias, faded, leaving only their silent connection. John's heart swelled, this loyalty, this bond across species, was a gift he'd carry forever. What would the lion do when the gate swung open? The release began as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of coral and violet, the air cooling with the faint tang of oncoming dusk. The rangers gathered, their faces a mix of awe and reverence, as Aisha opened the gate, its hinges creaking like a final note in a long song. The lion stepped forward, its paws sinking into the soft soil, and paused, turning its massive head toward Kofi. Then, in a moment that stole every breath, the lion approached the gorilla, its tail flicking gently, and pressed its forehead against Kofi's chest, a gesture so tender it felt like a vow. Kofi's hand rose, brushing the lion's mane, his low hoot trembling with emotion. How could such a fierce creature show such gratitude? The lion pulled back, its eyes lingering on Kofi as if memorizing him, then turned toward the jungle, its silhouette sharp against the fading light. With a sudden, triumphant roar, a sound that rolled through the trees like thunder, shaking the very air, the lion bounded forward, its powerful strides kicking up dust that glowed in the twilight. Kofi stood, his frame steady but his gaze soft, watching until the lion vanished into the green sea of ferns. John wiped a tear, his voice catching as he whispered to Kofi, "You changed him, you know." The rangers clapped softly, their murmurs blending with the evening's first owl hoots, but John wondered, would Kofi feel the void of this farewell? As night fell, the jungle wrapped them in its velvet dark, the air thick with the lonely scent of moss and the distant splash of a stream. Kofi lingered by the empty enclosure, his silhouette bathed in moonlight, his grunts quieter now, almost reflective. John sat beside him, the silence between them heavy with shared understanding, the kind only a profound connection could forge. The lion was free, its life a testament to Kofi's compassion, but this goodbye marked a new chapter for them all. The jungle seemed to hum its approval, its creatures stirring in the shadows, as if honoring this interspecies bond. What legacy would this moment leave in the wild, and how would it shape their path forward? The jungle stirred with a fresh energy, its air laced with the crisp, almost minty scent of eucalyptus and the faint buzz of bees darting through blooming vines. The story of Kofi and the lion had ignited the reserve, shared in hushed tones around crackling campfires, where rangers' voices blended with the rhythmic croak of frogs. John walked the familiar trails, his boots kicking up red dust that swirled in the dawn's soft light, Kofi loping beside him, his knuckles thumping the earth like a heartbeat. The gorilla's eyes, still tender from the lion's farewell, held a quiet wisdom, as if he knew their tale of compassion had shifted something in the wild. This wasn't just a story, it was a beacon, a call to see the jungle through the lens of unity. How far would its light reach? At the ranger station, the tale took on a life of its own, blooming into a legend that drew every listener in. Aisha, her fingers smudged with ink from documenting the lion's release, recounted the story to visiting researchers, her voice trembling as she described Kofi's gentle muzzle. The researchers, their notebooks brimming with charts, leaned forward, their skepticism melting into wonder at this proof of empathy across species. They called Kofi a pioneer, a living testament to coexistence, his actions rewriting their understanding of animal bonds. John stood nearby, his chest warm with pride, but a question lingered: could this story reshape how the world saw the wild? The answer was unfolding in the whispers already spreading beyond the reserve. The nearby village embraced the tale, its dusty streets alive with children who gathered at dusk, their giggles ringing like chimes as they etched Kofi and the lion in the earth with twigs. Elders, their eyes crinkled from years under the sun, shared ancient stories of animals forging alliances under starlit skies, as if Kofi's compassion echoed truths older than the hills. One evening, John brought Kofi to the village, the gorilla's massive frame drawing gasps as his fur caught the flicker of a bonfire's embers. A girl, barely 10, offered Kofi a mango, her shy grin mirroring John's own awe from years ago. This solidarity, sparked by a gorilla's heart, felt like a seed sown in the community's soul, ready to sprout into something enduring. What would this unity nurture as the years unfolded? Back in the jungle, the reserve pulsed with a new reverence, the air thick with the musky scent of wet bark after a sudden shower. Rangers reported fewer poacher traps, as if the story had kindled a protective instinct in the villages nearby. On patrol, Kofi paused to sniff the breeze, his grunts soft but certain, guiding John past a hidden snare glinting in the undergrowth. John scratched Kofi's back, the gorilla's contented sigh a reminder of their unshakable connection, a bond that had weathered every storm. The jungle seemed to hum its approval, its canopy swaying under a sky painted with streaks of pink and gold, as if blessing this legacy of care. Could this unity hold in a world so often torn apart? The story didn't stop at the village. It spread through radio waves, inked in articles, and captured by a documentary crew, their lenses framing Kofi's silhouette against a fiery sunset, his gaze steady and profound. John watched, his heart full, as rangers shared their own tales, of Kofi alerting them to danger, of his playful nudges that lightened their hardest days. Tembo, a gruff ranger, admitted he'd wept at the lion's release, Kofi's tenderness cracking his stoic shell. Another, a young woman named Lila, spoke of how Kofi's vigilance inspired her to join the reserve, her eyes bright with purpose. This wasn't just about one gorilla or one lion, it was about the protection of a fragile world where empathy could thrive. What new paths would this inspiration carve? The reserve became a hub for change, its trails bustling with volunteers drawn by the story's pull. One morning, John met a conservationist from Nairobi, her clipboard filled with plans for anti-poaching patrols modeled on Kofi's instincts. She spoke of Kofi as a symbol, his compassion a blueprint for protecting the wild. John nodded, his thoughts drifting to the lion, now roaming free, its roar perhaps carrying Kofi's lesson to distant prides. The air, heavy with the sweet bloom of jacaranda, seemed to carry their story further, its petals drifting like promises. John felt a quiet certainty. The jungle had crowned Kofi its teacher, and its lessons were only beginning. How would this tale shape the reserve's future? Months later, the reserve hosted a gathering, the clearing alive with the chatter of rangers, villagers, and conservationists, the air rich with the smoky tang of roasted maize. Children ran past, clutching drawings of Kofi, while elders spoke of harmony, their voices weaving with the rustle of leaves overhead. Kofi, resting under a sprawling baobab, its gnarled branches framing a sky dusted with stars, seemed to sense the moment's weight, his grunts soft as he watched the crowd. John stood beside him, the cool earth grounding his feet, reflecting on how one act of compassion had rippled outward, binding human and animal in a shared dream. The jungle, with its endless cycles, had gifted them a legacy. What new stories would it inspire? The tale of Kofi and the lion became a touchstone, a reminder that the wild held lessons no classroom could teach. Rangers launched training programs, inspired by Kofi's vigilance, to protect the reserve's creatures with renewed fervor. Villagers planted trees along the jungle's edge, their hands deep in the soil, honoring the bond they'd witnessed. John and Kofi continued their patrols, the gorilla's presence a quiet force, his eyes scanning the horizon as if guarding the story itself. One evening, as the sky burned crimson and the air carried the faint chirp of crickets, John sat with Kofi by a stream, its gentle gurgle a backdrop to their silence. The story had changed them all, a testament to the wild's greatest gift, a heart that knows no boundaries. Would the world listen to its call? Years later, the reserve thrived, its trails alive with new voices, students, scientists, and travelers, all drawn by the legend of Kofi. A small museum stood at the entrance, its walls adorned with photos of Kofi and the lion, their story etched in plaques that spoke of empathy and unity. John, now gray at the temples, still walked with Kofi, the gorilla slower but no less vigilant, his grunts a steady rhythm in the jungle's song. The village children, now grown, led conservation efforts, their hands planting seeds that would shade future generations. The lion's roar, though distant, seemed to linger in the wind, a reminder of the bond that started it all. This legacy, born of a gorilla's heart, had become a movement. How much further could it grow? The jungle itself seemed to carry the story forward, its creatures moving with a quiet respect, as if Kofi's compassion had softened the wild's edges. Monkeys chattered more boldly, antelopes grazed closer to the trails, and even the leopards, elusive and fierce, seemed to pause in Kofi's presence. John often sat by the baobab, its bark worn smooth by years of reflection, and thought of the lion, free, fierce, forever changed. Kofi, now a patriarch of the reserve, rested beside him, his eyes tracing the stars, as if seeing the threads that tied all life together. The air, rich with the scent of blooming orchids, felt alive with possibility. What new miracles would the jungle weave? Years had passed, and the jungle had grown lusher, its trails now woven with new paths carved by those inspired by Kofi's tale. The air carried the rich scent of blooming hibiscus, mingling with the earthy tang of freshly turned soil from village gardens. John, his hair now silver, walked slower, his steps measured but steady, Kofi at his side, the gorilla's fur flecked with gray yet his eyes still bright with purpose. The reserve had become a sanctuary, its borders expanded by global donations, all sparked by the story of a gorilla and a lion. John often paused by the stream, its gentle ripples catching the dawn's light, and felt the weight of their journey, a connection that had reshaped a world. Kofi, now a revered elder, still patrolled with John, his grunts softer but no less commanding, guiding young rangers through the undergrowth. The village had built a school, its walls painted with murals of Kofi's vigil, where children learned of empathy and the wild's wisdom. One boy, named Kofi in honor of the gorilla, often trailed John, his questions endless, his dreams tied to the jungle's heart. John smiled, seeing the gorilla's spirit reflected in those eager eyes, a reminder that compassion's seeds, once planted, could bloom for generations. What new heroes would rise from this legacy? The lion, though long gone, lived on in stories, its roar a symbol of overcoming etched in the reserve's lore. Rangers swore they heard it on quiet nights, a deep rumble rolling through the mist, as if the jungle itself spoke of unity. Kofi seemed to hear it too, his gaze lifting to the horizon, his massive hand resting on John's shoulder, a gesture of loyalty unbroken by time. The air, alive with the chatter of parrots and the rustle of leaves, felt charged with promise, as if the wild was writing new chapters. Could this harmony endure in a world still learning to listen? One evening, under a sky ablaze with stars, John and Kofi sat by the baobab, its ancient roots cradling them like an embrace. The village glowed in the distance, its fires flickering like beacons, while the jungle hummed its eternal song. John traced the scars on Kofi's arm, remnants of that first rescue, and felt a gratitude too vast for words. This gorilla had taught him that love, between man and beast, between rivals, could change everything. The story of Kofi and the lion wasn't just theirs, it belonged to the world, a light to guide the lost. What dreams would it spark next? As John closed his eyes, the jungle's pulse seemed to whisper, the work wasn't done. Kofi's legacy lived in every tree planted, every snare removed, every heart opened. The wild had spoken, and its message was clear: compassion was the truest strength, the key to coexistence. John squeezed Kofi's hand, the gorilla's warmth a steady anchor, and knew their story would never fade. It was etched in the stars, in the earth, in the wild's beating heart, forever calling the world to listen. And there you have it, a story that began with a desperate cry in the jungle and ended with a legacy that echoed across the wild. Kofi, the gorilla who saw beyond instinct, and the lion who learned to trust, showed us that compassion can bridge even the fiercest divides. Their tale, carried on the jungle's breath, wove a tapestry of hope, binding rangers, villagers, and creatures in a shared dream. John learned it, the reserve lived it, and the world felt its ripple, a reminder that sometimes, the greatest teachers have 4 paws and a heart bigger than the savannah. Think about the animals in your life, those soulful eyes that seem to know your every fear, your every joy. Maybe it was a dog who stayed by your side through a dark night, a cat who curled up when you needed warmth, or even a wild creature whose glance felt like a gift. What did they teach you? Drop your stories in the comments, because this jungle's got room for every heartbeat. And if Kofi's lesson touched you, share this video. Let's spread the wild's wisdom to every corner of the world, from city streets to distant forests. This isn't just a story, it's a call to listen, to look at the world with eyes wide open, to see the threads of empathy that tie us all. The jungle taught us that unity isn't just possible, it's the heartbeat of life itself. So, go out there, hug your pets a little tighter, watch the birds a little longer, and maybe, just maybe, extend a hand to someone who feels like an enemy. Because if a gorilla and a lion can find friendship, what's stopping us? Until next time, keep listening to the wild, it's got more to say than you'd ever believe, and its lessons are waiting for you.